Hi, I'm Nate Shear, and this is Mind Force, a podcast that helps all of us navigate love, life, and learning, one conversation at a time. Let's get started. Today, we'll be talking about resilience, psychology, and building confidence. So, we'll start with the easy stuff, the background. Let's start with a quick introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And what brings you here today?
Great to be here. My name's Chris Anselmo. I write a newsletter called Hello Adversity, where I share different resilience strategies and resources that have helped me on my rare disease journey. So, to kind of back up a bit, I live with an adult onset form of muscular dystrophy called limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. I know that's kind of a mouthful, but it's it started when I was about 21 years old. I'm 38 now, and it's really informed everything that's happened in my adult life. I, you know, played sports growing up. I was athletic. I was active all through college. And then after college, I started noticing muscle weakness while going for a run after work. And then from that, I gradually got weaker, got my diagnosis. But really, the hardest part of my entire experience was the emotional and then the mental components of that. I mean, the physical components of getting weaker obviously are very difficult, but I really struggled with kind of how to respond to it. And it's only through a lot of trial and error, through figuring out what's worked, what hasn't worked, that I've been able to cultivate resilience, that I've been able to kind of bounce back and really be able to kind of rebuild some of the dreams that had been sidelined after I thought, my world was crashing down and nothing would be possible. So my newsletter, Hello Adversity, is kind of the culmination of all of that. I share different resilience strategies every week that have worked for me. I have interviews with people that have inspired me to kind of learn how they've become resilient themselves. And then I offer different resources, things I've read, things I've learned that have been really helpful for me.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Chris. Just to set the scene, where are you calling from?
I forgot to mention that. I'm in Connecticut, United States.
Connecticut. Yeah, I had to throw that in there just to see. Had people from Africa, Australia, Germany, and I was like, maybe I should start asking where people are coming from. But I do thank you for coming on the show. I feel like the most important resource we really have is time. And it's just so precious. And maybe that's me getting older, but taking the time to help others seems to be, one of the most noble things. So appreciate you putting the newsletter together and, being here to help others. I think one of those things that's, core to the show and why I started this show, losing my grandma as a kid, like not able to talk about things, not able to find other people that are going through similar situations. And you have the breakdown of your physical body, but I think, like you said, the most difficult part is probably the things that people don't see, they can't identify, they can't connect with, and so I think that's a large struggle, and that's why we're having difficult conversations on the show and trying to work through that. No one will ever say, "Oh, well, I've done exactly that," but even if someone knows there's someone walking a parallel path, I still think you feel like, oh, okay, well, other people are there. I think that's how we spiral and go into negativity where it's like, it's only me and I don't know what to do because I'm the only one. If anyone's feeling that way, it's just not true. There's like 8 billion people in the world. There's someone that's going through something similar, if not very, very close to the same thing. We'll start with the warm up, a few fun questions for you, Chris.
Okay.
What's a personal story that highlights your journey with resilience?
Well, part of my journey when I started experiencing muscle weakness was the onset of falling. I used to, again, I wasn't like a star athlete or anything, but I did, I was able to run and jump and play sports and go to the gym, that kind of thing. But my body had gotten to a point where my knees could no longer support my own body weight, which was really jarring the first time it happened. I was walking to the store and then my knee gave out and I fell. And as you can imagine, that was incredibly difficult. But that experience over time, because it would happen like once a month, once every, few weeks, you hear the cliche of like, all you have to do is like pick yourself up one more time, like one more time than you've fallen, like fall 8 times, get up 9 times or something. I always kind of roll my eyes at that advice, but I've actually had to live it. And just that experience of because I had no choice. I had to get back up. And, that doing that over and over again is as difficult, as often as awful as it was, really showed me at least that, as difficult as this experience was and as jarring as it is to actually fall, the fact that, I kept showing up every day to just live my life despite that, knowing that that was always in the back of my mind as a possibility, but to not let that stop me from living life, pursuing my goals, became in a way kind of a confidence boost, not in like the cliche inspirational way, but just in the like, like this thing like really sucks, but I just keep going. Like it really, that's kind of what it instilled in me. Just this notion of just keep going. Not to be like, oh, I'm the brave guy that got back up, but just like, this awful thing keeps happening, but I'm just going to have to find a way through that. And it took many years to kind of get to that point. And every time it happened, it was still terrible. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like, oh, this is another chance to practice resilience, but it showed something in me that I think I didn't realize that I had, which was just an inner toughness, an inner resilience. And from that, kind of a lot of lessons were learned.
Feel like it's kind of an overdone term, sort of a buzzword. And I don't know, me being in the military, we seem to love this word. We say, be like a rubber band, bounce back, things like that. And I always just feel cheesy. And I don't know if that's just because it's used too much, but I'm curious, like if you had to give it to someone, how would you say it instead of get up one more time, bounce back? Just, is there a better way to give that advice? Or, from your experience, how would you say it?
I would actually say, I'd just say keep going. Actually, that's the phrase that always is in my mind. Because I think it kind of cuts through all the clutter of some of those cliches, because people can roll their eyes at, bounce back or like, pick yourself up after a fall. But to keep going is just to be kind of an acknowledgement that, yeah, life is hard. Life is difficult. But if you can just find it in yourself to just keep showing up day after day, things won't necessarily magically get better, but you're at least keeping yourself in the game for opportunities to arise, serendipity, meeting somebody, learning something that might change your life. But to keep going is to keep kind of putting yourself out there, as difficult as life can be. And whether we want to or not, that's really the only way to get through life, is to just keep showing up despite what happens. So I found that that's kind of a useful phrase, and I think people have found that to be useful when I share it with them, because it kind of acknowledges life is hard, but it also is not, one of these cliches that sometimes, as you said, gets vastly overused.
I guess we can learn a lot from Dory from Finding Nemo, right? Just keep swimming, or this too shall pass. But I guess that's another cliche buzz phrase. But things are always changing. If it's good, it'll change. If it's bad, it'll also change.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, another word I feel like that's, maybe lost some meaning is confidence. You mentioned the word earlier, building up some confidence as you were picking yourself back up and things like that, not necessarily overly charismatic and, walking with a strut or whatever. Can you kind of define what confidence means to you?
That's a great question. Confidence to me, yeah, as you said, it doesn't have to be like outwardly and showy and just, putting somebody else down, to make you look better, that kind of thing. It's really just kind of an inner knowledge that, what you want to achieve or what you want out of life is possible, and that you're capable of doing that. It comes from experience. It comes from, again, an inner resilience of just, expecting to fail. I think, you can confidently fail in the sense that you kind of see it as a learning experience, an opportunity to get better, knowing that, you're going to find a way to adjust, to adapt. And, I think it's almost like an understated kind of confidence, where it's just like an inner knowing that, if there's something you want, or if you want to be a certain way, you can be that, secure in your self-worth, secure in your, in valuing yourself. Because I think sometimes, people, again, they think it's outwardly, they think it's showy, they think it means, being obnoxious. But real confidence, authentic confidence is just, it's more subtle, it's more understated, it's more accepting that you have what it takes, or that if you don't yet know the answer to something, that you'll eventually get to that point. And a lot of it comes from self-love, from self-worth, and I think, once you can show that to yourself, then it's a lot easier to be outwardly confident. So, I mean, with me, I definitely was not the most confident person before the disease, and then definitely during the disease, the onset of the disease. Over time, through experience, through kind of seeing how, resilient I actually was, that I gained a lot of confidence from that because I was able to see, like, okay, I keep showing up, I keep going every day. Um, these things are happening to me that are not necessarily great, but I'm continuing to make a difference in my life and others' lives. I'm using it for good. And just through that whole process, I was able to see, like, okay, I'm a lot more with it than I thought that I was. I'm able to do things with this hand that I was dealt that I can use for good. That's built. Those have been kind of the building blocks to, again, my sense of self-worth, self-love that, stems from just all that I've been through. And that kind of leads to kind of building that authentic confidence.
I think it really goes hand in hand. I almost feel like the definition of resilience should be changed because I think resilience slash confidence both come from doing something difficult and then realizing that you're on the other side of it. I think that's why the rubber band kind of bugs me because the rubber band bounces back by itself. You don't do the thing. Like, that's not how it works. You don't get resilience or confidence. They really go hand in hand in this example for free. That's not how it works. You do the difficult thing, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm still here. That was awful. It was pretty painful, but I'm still here. I think of like someone that's like a terrible driver and they're like, well, did you die when you get to the location? That's probably not a good example, but that's what I think of. And so I think that's why, those should probably be like redefined or maybe just addressed differently. Like resilience doesn't just show up, the band doesn't go back to itself. But yeah, I think that's really interesting because I think that's that internal drive, like you said, and it's not outwardly or whatever, but you've gotten through it and you got to the other side. So you're okay. So before we close out the warm up, Chris, I wanted to see if you had a question for me.
Um, we were joking before that I probably shouldn't ask you how did you start this podcast. So not asking that. I'd say what's one piece of advice or resilience strategy that you're either surprised worked or you don't think like should work, but then you actually do it and then you realize that it actually does work. Is there something that's been particularly effective for you?
Yeah, I think the quiet time in the morning, I've been doing that for the last couple months now, getting up, rolling the clock back a little earlier. I don't consider myself a morning person, so rolling a clock back 30 minutes, even though it's not that much time, was pretty dreadful at first. But when we have work and, I go and work out and, when I get home from work, I do stuff with the kids and then they wind down, they go to bed. Like there's so much activity during the day. That moment of quietness where it's me and my wife now, I go over, what the day looks like, what the week looks like, being able to just like correlate your thoughts for a second. And I think that's why, like you mentioned, like surprising, like I'd heard like, oh yeah, have time to yourself and take a moment and whatever. It's like, yeah, whatever. Like that's not really going to do that much, but it dramatically changes. I feel like the whole level of stress and things like that, because now in this day and age, I feel like our thing is faster, faster. We want fast food through a drive-through. You can Google an answer in seconds. Like everything is done yesterday. Like there is no more slow or quiet. If you're slow, then you're seen like you're not productive or something like that. And so I think getting back to that slowing down and reflecting is super powerful and just getting like your mind set for the day. Just that alone, like figuring out what we got. Cause I got the show, my wife's got activities, the kids have activities. Half the time before this, I was double booking stuff and then it creates extra stress because now I got to cancel or reschedule guests and then she's frustrated. And so just going through a quick thing in the morning, 30 minutes, eat some oatmeal, figure out what the day looks like. I would highly recommend, even if you don't feel like you're a morning person, because I definitely am not, just get the thoughts together. What time do you wake up, Chris?
I tried it, aim for 8 o'clock.
Nice.
I do not usually hit that. It's usually more around 8:30. But
You got those couple alarms.
yeah, yeah.
Well, we'll move into your three main pillars. So, your first pillar is resilience. So, it's funny, we were talking about that a little bit. So, bouncing back from life's challenges. So, what are the biggest challenges you've had to overcome? You talked about, the rare disease. Has there been other things, or do you want to expand on the rare disease?
I think it's probably the rare disease. It's impacted so many different aspects of my life that everything kind of stems back to that. Because when it first happened, I kind of had an idea for how I thought my life was going to go that didn't involve the disease, only to find out that, this is now part of my experience and that, I'd probably lose the ability to walk within a decade. When I found that out from my diagnosis, that was definitely jarring. And then just, the emotional aftermath of all of that, dealing with getting weaker, dealing with trying to figure out, what's still possible in my life. And then just learning again through trial and error how to actually navigate life with this rare disease, and then to ultimately build a life that's both meaningful and, I can still achieve a lot of the goals that I had originally set for myself. And yeah, I mean, that kind of has taught me everything I need to know about resilience. That's not to say other bad things haven't happened in my life, but, people passing away and whatnot. That's been kind of the central experience that's kind of framed everything I've learned about resilience, but also just how to become resilient. And then also, part of resilience too, which I don't think we've touched on yet, is kind of you have to relearn lessons over and over and over again. You might learn strategies for taming anxiety, but then when you actually need them, they either don't follow them, or you forget them, or you just want to do the thing that you shouldn't be doing, that you shouldn't be doing, but it feels better than actually, pausing and taking deep breaths and thinking about things and going outside. It's much easier to just kind of ruminate in your anxiety of whatever the situation is. And the same thing goes with like sleeping habits. Same thing goes with finding time to meditate, actually meditating itself, and other, strategies like that, where it's just like, what the best practice is. And then it's really hard to get yourself to actually do it sometimes. So that's also been a bit of a challenge, but all of that has just come from the original thing, which was the disease, and then just learning how to kind of adapt and to ultimately build a meaningful, worthwhile life with this. I like to call it a giant anvil I got to carry around everywhere with me. I'm just like this thing I can't get rid of. How do I
The
deal with
elephant
it?
in the room
Yeah,
that
the
actually
elephant in
goes
the
with
room.
you. That makes me think of two questions. So I'll give them to you
Yeah.
one at a time. The first one I'm curious about is, how do you process when you get that news? I've heard like the 5 stages and things like that. Like, how did you actually, like, I'm sure it's not like whatever the book says or whatever. How did you process, like you said, being able to walk and losing that? And like, how do you process all that?
Yeah, I don't think I went through the 5 stages, not necessarily in the order that they're outlined. I think I either experienced them all at once, at least the ones that were not acceptance. Acceptance came later. But, it was just kind of a jumble of emotions. And there definitely was denial. That was kind of the first, which I know is the first stage of the 5 stages of grief. But I kind of was in like a bit of a haze at first. I'm just like, what was this? I had kind of a sense. I won't go into the entire backstory, but it was actually diagnosed in high school because I was in a car accident, and my blood work eventually indicated that I had some sort of a muscle disease. But I was told then that it wouldn't happen until later in life. So my expectations were completely thrown off, so that when it actually did start and I was re-diagnosed, I had to confront it much sooner than I expected. So I was kind of in denial about that. Like, okay, this can't be right, because I was still clinging to like the original diagnosis. And then it just became, I think I just went like right from denial to depression. But probably within there was anger, definitely a lot of bargaining. But it just all kind of came on at once as I just tried to grapple with what had happened. And, we're talking about processing what had happened. That took me many years. I think even today I'm still, in a way, still processing it. But the bulk of the processing took probably like 5 or 6 years to come to grips with, in terms of just accepting what had happened, but also kind of formulating a response. I definitely made a lot of mistakes during that time. I didn't ask for help. I didn't plan properly, kind of realistically for what was happening. I didn't want to face it. I just kind of stuck my head in the sand. And then, when I did have to face it, I started falling again, which I mentioned earlier. I had to face it. And then I just kind of went completely the opposite direction. I'm just like, this thing is taking over my life. My life is over. What's the point of, creating plans, having goals, because I'm not going to be able to achieve them anyways. And so I was all over the place emotionally, which obviously impacted my ability to mount an effective response. But, eventually the dust settled. And yeah, I think really the number one thing was just starting to become action oriented. I'm just getting to a point where just like, okay, this thing is here for good. I can't do anything about that, but I do need to move forward with life. And, I had all these goals on the back burner, going to business school, doing more writing. And, it's kind of now or never, just like, how can I actually make this work? And that process of doing that, I think, was really instrumental for me, especially the business school part, because that seemed like a big goal that just wasn't possible. Had too many moving parts. I didn't know how strong I was going to be in 2 years, so I thought that maybe it wasn't possible, but I really forced myself to figure out the steps involved in making it happen. And I was able to do it. And that action, that process of, creating contingency plans and thinking through, what are the different steps involved? How can I ask for help, etc., really got me more future focused. And that was really instrumental in ultimately being able to process what had happened, just by kind of almost not necessarily distracting me from the disease itself, but just giving me something else to focus on, and to something positive to be able to dedicate my efforts towards, rather than just endless lamenting or rumination.
So far in your process, Chris, has there been stuff people have told you can't do, and you've been able to progress beyond that? Like the business school, you thought that, but has there been anybody, maybe your worst critic, because we all are, right? But from the outside, has people told you things that you can't do and you've been able to accomplish those?
I don't think there's been any situation where I've explicitly been told I can't do something. I do know people where that's been done. Thankfully, that hasn't happened to me. But I think, as you said, my inner critic actually is the one that's usually placing limitations on me, saying, oh, you can't do that. And even today, like, I'm tempted to believe that, what my inner critic says. But it's through that process of just being like, okay, is this actually true? And then kind of just scoping out the different pieces involved, different steps in the process, that I am able to see, like, okay, this is possible. I might need extra help doing it. I might need to do it different than other people do it, but it is possible. There is a way. And really the calculation I end up making is not necessarily like something is impossible, but just something's going to involve, so many steps, or just require so much logistical planning that, is this still something I really want to do? And sometimes the answer is yes. Like if it's traveling to a conference, that involves a lot of logistical planning, but it's something that's worthwhile and something that I'm willing to do, versus something else where it's just like, I know I could do it, but like, do I actually want to do it? And then sometimes I'm like, okay, maybe I don't actually want to do it that badly. So that's kind of the calculation that I kind of run through in my head. In terms of something being truly impossible, I'm sure there are things that are truly impossible, but I like to, at least before I declare that, to at least see, like, are there ways that it can be done? Have others done it? I like to search online to see if, somebody that might be in a similar situation, or somebody that might be going through something even more difficult than what I'm going through, if they've been able to accomplish it. And usually there's almost always, I won't say there's always, but there's almost always an example of someone that has done it. So that gives me confidence that most things can be done. It just has to look a little bit different probably than what, an average person that doesn't have mobility issues would do it.
That's awesome. One of the things I'd love to highlight on the show, Chris, is success. I feel like we talk about the difficult things, but would you mind, it's kind of like tooting your own horn, I guess, but would you mind walking through some of the things you initially thought that were not possible and now some of the things that you've been able to do to, encourage others?
First and foremost was going to business school. So that was something that I'd wanted to do for several years. But then, the symptoms started and I got so focused on that and what I was losing that I didn't think that it would still be possible. But again, through that process, I was able to show that I was able to do it. And then I actually went out and did it. And that was a huge confidence boost for me. So that happened about almost 10 years ago now. I graduated in 2016, but my math might be a little bit off. But the point being, it was a huge confidence boost because it was a very difficult step for anybody, even somebody that has full mobility, to make it through a full-time MBA program. And I was able to show myself that, yeah, I can do this, which then had the follow-on effect of giving me confidence to do other things, other hard things. I used to hate public speaking, but, it's something that by telling my story, I've gotten a lot better at and something that I actually enjoy now, which is why I'm here talking at this very moment.
Yeah, here you are.
I loved writing, but I'd always kind of pushed it to the side, just focused on other things. But I really got back to doing that over the last few years. First, just kind of writing a blog about my story, just kind of sharing updates on my journey for family and friends. But then within the last couple of years, starting Hello Adversity, which is kind of more audience focused in the sense that I'm using my story, but then taking it and applying it to readers, the takeaways from my story that they can use in their own lives, whether it's different strategies or different, actionable tips. And in doing that, that's, I didn't know if I'd be able to write consistently. I didn't think that that's something that I was good at and that I would, kind of expected to fail at it. But I was actually able to show that it is something I love to do. And I love, being able to interact with readers every week. They might have questions for me or they might be inspired by what I'm writing. Building an audience from scratch is definitely something that I never expected to be doing, but now I have a pretty decent readership, and that's really motivating. Also scary, but definitely motivating to write for them every week, knowing that hopefully I'm making a difference just a little bit maybe in their lives. And so that's definitely been a huge confidence boost. And then, just the last thing that has been a big success for me is just my interpersonal relations in terms of how I interact with people. I think having gone through this experience, not to say that I was a shallow person before it, but I think since the symptoms have started and since, my life's been kind of changed forever by this disease, it's really kind of given me just an ability to kind of just cut through the fluff. I really want to get to know people. I want to help them. I want to understand them. And sometimes by telling my story, I've given permission to people, for people to tell their story. Not explicit permission, but they'll just, because they've read something that I've written, they feel at liberty to share something about their lives that they might not be comfortable sharing with others. And in the process of doing that, that's how friendships are strengthened, relationships are strengthened. I have several friends that have shared things with me, which I'll not share now, but they've shared things with me that I'm like 99% sure they haven't shared with others because they've seen how I've kind of talked about my own journey and they felt comfortable telling me because they know that I would understand. It might be a different situation than what I'm going through, but just that process of kind of disclosing what's happening in my life kind of give them the confidence to then share that with me. And through that, we've become much better friends. And, if there's any silver lining to this disease, that's definitely one of them. Is just a lot of the friendships that I've made over the years have been strengthened because of this type of thing.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that's just really undervalued is we get through this life through connection. I mean, we go back to caveman days and things like that. Now we have cars, we go to separate houses, but we were built on community, eating together and hunting together and whatever else. And so it's kind of unfortunate in some ways that we've gotten more, disconnected, and we're more connected than ever, but then disconnected at the same time, because that's really how we get through life. I know, when I have a section that I'm leading, when I first was in the roles of more like the manager roles and whatnot, like people didn't really want to bring anything to me. And it makes sense sense. Like if someone appears to be all squared away and whatnot, like I'm not bringing you anything. I'm not going to talk to you. And it wasn't until later I was like, I've been through a divorce and I co-parent and I've lost my dad and most of my grandparents have passed away. And, I just go through these things. And again, I'm not trying to compare. I'm not trying to say I've been there, but I'm just saying I've been through a few things. Like you can sit here and we can chat. And it wasn't until, I opened up about some of those challenges and difficulties I had. And then and then people will come in and tell you, how things are going. And so I think we really got to lean on that and that connection to be able to connect with other people because that's how we get through life. But feels like for whatever reason, social media and whatnot, we're a little more disconnected. Things look real good on social media. I try to do it every once in a while, like post something I'm like frustrated with or something, because I feel like it's always the vacations, it's always the good stuff. So every once in a while, I try to make a point like, I'm having difficulty with this and try to get that out there too. I'm sure the ratio is 1 to 10 or something, but I try to post a few things that are, a little bit more on the negative side. So I'm like, I don't want it to be all perfect. That's just obnoxious. But yeah, we'll move into your next pillar, Chris, which is the psychology behind growth and mindset. So what do you think are some common psychological barriers that hold people back from success?
I think a lot of it comes down to mindset and just self-beliefs. They're kind of intertwined, but definitely in the self-belief side, can I experience this too? Just, you see all the different obstacles involved, you see all the negative things, and you just kind of conclude that it's not possible. So that belief that it can be possible is really hard to cultivate. It's not something that can be easily kind of overcome. It kind of just takes experience, at least from my own life. I've kind of seen that where it took a while to get to a point where I was able to kind of call myself out on my own BS in a way to be like, okay, this actually is possible. Like, stop being dramatic. You just need to kind of think it through a little bit more. Well, I mean, the scripts that we tell ourselves are very powerful. You can very easily come to believe that something's not possible and then just internalize that, and all of a sudden it becomes the truth because you're not willing to see if there's another way. Again, limiting beliefs, just a sense that you've kind of come up against your limit and that the thing that you really want to achieve isn't possible because maybe you've never achieved it before, or you've always come up against that limit and then just turned around and went home. So I think that's really one of the major factors, and there's many ways to kind of get through those limiting beliefs, but I think just a lot of it comes back to kind of what we were talking about before with confidence, of just the confidence that you can get through it. You can find a way that even if you fail, even if you fall flat on your face, that it's not the end of the world. And then through that, just eventually you become more comfortable stepping outside your comfort zone. And then through that, you eventually get to a point where some of the perceived beliefs, you realize, weren't that formidable. And I think the more that you're able to do that, the more evidence that you can amass that you are someone that's able to do that. You are someone that can do hard things, because you can, again, point back to, oh, well, I did it, 2 years ago, like doing this other difficult thing, or I was doing it a week ago and had to do something even more difficult than this. And eventually you get to a point where it's just like, okay, I can do this. I recognize it's hard, but it is possible. And so that kind of is both mindset and self-belief, but just sometimes we can be our own worst enemies sometimes. And even if something's not readily apparent as to what the solution is, to at least believe that there is a solution, there is a way to do it. It might require you asking for help. It might require you doing some research, but there is a way through it. And it just, over time, the more that you're able to see that these perceived limits are not actually true, or they're not nearly as formidable as you thought, the more that they lose their power. I think to some degree, those limits will always be there, or at least it's kind of like a default response of just like, you want to do something hard, your immediate response is, oh, it's not possible. But eventually you get to a point where it's just like, okay, is this really true? And then you can kind of be like, no, because I've done it before. And then also, I know this is what I need to do, whether it's, seeking out other resources, asking for help, etc. But there is a way through it. And then just become more comfortable with that process of just, even if you don't have the answer today, eventually you'll get to that point where you will have an answer. But It's a very powerful process, that those limiting beliefs, the inner critic, and that can trip up a lot of people. And I say that from experience. Again, it took me many years to get to a point where I started to see like, okay, these things that I thought weren't possible anymore because of the disease, because of whatever lack of self-confidence, actually are possible. They just might require a different strategy. They might require more planning. They might require, a greater appetite for failure, but they can be done. And through that, all the success I've had in my life has come from moving beyond that point.
Yeah, it really makes me think of a couple things. The first one is one of my favorite books is Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. And one of her quotes says, "We're having conversations all the time, and sometimes they involve other people." And she's talking about the inner monologue. It's going all the time. And so, yeah, from time to time, there's other people involved in these conversations, but the one on the inside is always going from the moment you wake up. And so if you're feeding it the negativity and whatnot, that's with you just 24 hours. Well, I guess you got to sleep at some point, but 18 hours a day or something. And so I always love that quote and try to reflect back. And the thing it makes me think of is I was reading about WD-40. You got this lubricant thing that's in every household in the world. I've lived in Japan. I'm now in the UK. It doesn't matter where you are, you can buy WD-40. But that was the 40th recipe of that thing. They could have just as easily stopped at 39, quit, because they didn't think they were going to be able to do it, and they would never be known. No one would know what that was. But now it is a household name in like the entire world because they pressed on, because 39 wasn't that great, didn't line up, or whatever the scenario was, and they got to the 40th recipe, which was amazing, and now the entire world uses it. So sometimes you just got to press
that.
on.
That was an interesting story.
Yeah, it was really cool. I was like, oh, I just thought it was a random number. But I wanted to back up. It's kind of out of order, but I'm really curious, Chris. Earlier, you talked about the 5 stages and things like that. And one thing I want to highlight on this show, I feel like in leadership, books and things like that, sometimes they go hypothetical, but I really want to get practical with the advice. So what's a practical step you have for someone that feels overwhelmed or defeated or just got bad news? Like, what are the practical tips you have to be able to move through that?
I think, well, it really depends on the situation, but I think 2 things that have helped me the most. Well, when you're overwhelmed, the most helpful thing is to kind of just step away, take a break. It's counterintuitive because you want to just attack the problem. But sometimes, especially when I get overwhelmed, my mind starts to shut down and just like it just gets overworked. It's like a computer that just overheats. And no matter how much I want to solve the problem right then and there, just sometimes you have to admit that you just need to get away for a little bit, whether it's to go outside and, go for a walk, or to just step away from your computer and read a book, or to listen to music, or to take a nap. Just something that's not the task itself or the thing that you're worrying about, because that allows your mind to kind of recharge and reset. And that's, again, one of those strategies to talk about earlier that I constantly fail at, is even though I know it works, even though I've seen it work, I go against that advice so often. I found the most beneficial thing to do, especially when you're overwhelmed, is to take a break. In terms of somebody that may have received bad news, a diagnosis, or something of that nature, what eventually ended up working for me was just the process of journaling. I'm not somebody that necessarily uses a specific type of journal. I don't have set prompts I use every day, but I do like to write things down and to just think through problems, think through how I'm feeling. Because there's an act of actually writing it down, even writing down like what you're feeling, if they're negative emotions, of saying like, I am scared, I am angry, I am frustrated, I worry about my future. But putting as much structure to that as possible in terms of just being able to identify what your emotions are and then what you're actually afraid of, or what what is frustrating you, what's scaring you. I think there's probably scientific, I feel like there's studies that have shown that. I don't remember exact ones, but there is something to that where that is helpful, of just like giving something a name, of saying, okay, I'm afraid of X. I'm afraid of, Y, I'm afraid of Z. And then just kind of starting to think through, okay, well, what's my response to that? And this isn't something you do on day one. You know, you don't get a disease diagnosis and immediately jump into journaling mode where you just write about your feelings. You need time to process that. But at some point, especially what I experienced, there kind of comes that question of now what? Now, hopefully, it doesn't take as long as it took me, but you know, if you can start to think about that in terms of like practical actions you can take, that's where journaling really is beneficial because it just allows you to wrestle with problems, wrestle with specific questions you have, to brainstorm things, to create lists, to cross things out, to draw pictures, whatever you need to do to kind of just grapple with the problem. But then from there are practical actions that usually spring up. They may not necessarily solve the problem that right then and there, but at least can kind of get you moving forward towards action. So really eventually you want to get to a place where you are acting in some way. I found that the process of action, at least for me, reduces anxiety. Again, little actions may not solve the problem, but they can at least get you future oriented. They can get you focused on the right things. And then it can kind of build momentum from there. But it just gets you out of that rumination phase.
Yeah, that makes sense. There has to be something super powerful about the hand to pen to paper connection because I've talked to people all over the world and journaling has come up more than anything else with meditation right behind it. But journaling has been number one. So I don't know the study like you said, but it is very powerful. We'll move on to your final pillar, Chris, which is competence. We've touched on it a little bit, so we'll just go through a couple real quick. Love the practical, like I mentioned. So what do you have for daily habits or routines that can impact self-esteem and confidence?
I'd say, well, a lot of my confidence comes from taking action and just remembering, you know, that I am capable, that I am, you know, I've done hard things before and I'll continue to do them again. I don't necessarily do this every day, but I do have a document that I call my highlight reel, which is just basically all of my accomplishments, all the nice things people have said to me over the years, all of my best moments to kind of show anytime, especially when I'm low on confidence or, you know, I failed at something, maybe I didn't get a job that I'd wanted. I open that up and I'm able to see like, okay, you know, I've become a writer. I've done public speaking in front of 1,000 people, you know, helps people through a tough time. I'm writing a book, like all these things, all these accomplishments kind of are corrective in a way to show like, okay, maybe I do have more confidence than I thought. Maybe I do have the ability to be successful. Or I do have the ability to accomplish a lot in life. And, you know, whatever my inner critic is telling me at that moment, you know, isn't true because I have all this evidence that it is true. So I don't necessarily do that every day, but I use that fairly often. There have been times in the past where I've used affirmations. I, again, one of those things that I just keep forgetting to do. But I have found those to be helpful to kind of just, especially in the morning, to kind of get your mind in the right working order of just like, you know, whatever I face today, I can get through it. I am capable. You know, I have the ability. I'm loved. Whatever affirmations you need, but just like something to kind of start your day on a positive note. And that kind of persists throughout the day, which is nice. It's kind of a way to kind of prime your mind for the day ahead.
Yeah, that's awesome. I actually have a wooden box I had made in Japan because I had some thank you cards and different stuff. And I was like, what do I do with these? And so now I have that wooden box and I don't always open it up, like you said. Like it doesn't bust out all the time, but in difficult moments or imposter syndrome or you don't think you're supposed to be in the room or whatever it is, I do, you know, kind of glance back at the wooden boxes back there. It's like people sent me things. They hand wrote things. They took time. There was like, you know, something they needed to do something for some reason, you know, important, loved, things like that. So that's awesome. The last question in this one would be what's advice you have for someone struggling with self-doubt to push past fear?
I think really, one that I haven't touched on is the recognition that others are likely feeling the exact same thing that you're feeling. So in terms of, you're talking about imposter syndrome briefly earlier, you know, there have been times where I'm about to go on stage and maybe there was a speaker before me or I know that there's a speaker after me that's really accomplished. And I'm just like, I don't belong here. Or they're going to find out that I'm a complete fraud. And, you know, I just, it can be really, paralyzing in the sense that, all of a sudden you psych yourself out. Um, I just remember, like, everybody's feeling that way. Everybody gets nervous. I remember there's some NBA star, I can't remember who it was, but like they throw up before every game because they're nervous, like that kind of thing. Nerves are normal. Self doubt is normal. Everybody else is kind of winging it too. Everybody else feels like they're an amateur about to get found out. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner you can kind of realize you're on a level playing field. I mean, there definitely are people that are confident that might just lack self awareness, but for the most part, most people are, terrified of the same things that you're terrified of, are afraid to show vulnerability or afraid to put themselves out there. If they're doing something creative or artistic, they have self doubt that their book that they write is going to be a flop, or that the thing that they drew or painted is, going to get panned. Everybody has that self doubt going in, but what separates people is that some people actually move past that and just continue on, accepting that that might happen, but it likely won't happen. Then some people just never, they turn around and go back. Like they're just like, I don't want to face the potential for rejection, the potential for embarrassment. And so I would just, piece of advice I would give is just to push through that and just to know that that feels completely normal.
And I think
That's been
it's
kind
like,
of helpful.
I think it's good. I think it's something that's odd where it's like over the course of time, we've seen it as a bad thing. But I have two examples from my life, which I think, help demonstrate. Like, my first career field was air traffic control. So telling airplanes not to hit each other. And I remember feeling, a little nervous to step into position. And I remember, a wise mentor was like, it's good that you feel nervous. If you don't care, there's a problem. If you don't care if two planes hit each other, people die and millions of dollars are lost, there's a problem. That's weird. You should feel a little apprehensive, not, too much. Everything in this life is about balance, but I thought that was really powerful. We're like, that shows that you care. And so the other example I have is it was like my second episode of this podcast ever. I wanted to interview Chief Woods. He's a huge personality, big person. He's awesome. And he was about to leave. He was like flying out the next morning. And so I had one day, I was like, hey, could we do it today? I rushed into his office. I bolted these, microphones down, and I was out of breath because I was freaked out. And I remember he's like, take a deep breath. You're fine. But he said the same thing. He said, I love that you're nervous because it means you care. If you didn't care, you wouldn't give any effort. You wouldn't be nervous. You'd just be trying to wing it. It wouldn't be that great. He's like, you put the time and effort in, and you have that nervousness because it's something that you care about. And so I wish the nervousness would be more related to like care as opposed to like, oh, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to do it. That's good. I mean, it doesn't feel good, I guess, but it is good, right?
Yeah, it's evidence that you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. If you weren't nervous, and you're probably not doing something that was really a big risk. But it's only through kind of getting nervous and putting yourself out there that, the greatest life breakthroughs can take place. So nerves are a positive indicator in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Will Smith, or a couple different people have mentioned like skydiving, like the greatest euphoria when you actually are in free fall comes after that moment of just complete terrifiedness, You have to push through that. I got my mom to jump at 50, and she closed her eyes the whole time. So it's funny. So now she wants to jump again because I'm like, oh, you missed the best part, the actual like viewing and the experience on the way down. She was still a little freaked out. But
Yeah,
well,
that's really
Chris, I'd
hard
like to
to do
try to
that.
bring all these, yeah, exactly. Bring all these things together. If listeners could take one key lesson from this conversation, what do you hope it is?
I would just say to basically just like don't overcomplicate confidence. To just, you do have the ability, you do have the capacity to handle adversity. You're more resilient than you realize. Even if you don't know how to do something, that doesn't mean that it's not possible. If you're facing something difficult, you will get through it. That's not platitudes. That's not, toxic positivity or whatever. It's just an admission that, this is life. Life is all about difficulty. It's about facing hard things and then finding a way through it, no matter how imperfectly. Someone like myself that made every mistake in the book to eventually get to where I'm at today. I know that, whoever's listening to this, if you're facing something difficult, that you can get through it. I mean, it doesn't mean you're going to get through it easily. It doesn't mean that you're going to make it go away completely. But you know, there is life on the other side of whatever you're dealing with. It may have to be learning to live with the challenge through your entire life. Like I have to live with this disease, but you know, you will adapt. You will find a way through that. And as long as you're willing to keep going, as long as you're willing to accept that you're going to do it imperfectly, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have days where everything feels like it's falling apart. Again, nobody's grading you on how you're handling adversity. And if they were, I think we would all fail. So I think that removes a lot of the pressure in a way of, trying to do things perfectly or trying to make things go away completely. Once you accept that they're not going to go away completely, even if you somehow got through whatever you're going through, there'll be something else waiting for you on the other side that's just as difficult. So life is just a series of navigating obstacles, but just rely on others, seek support, have conversations with people where you let them know what's going on. And I think I'll say you'll be just fine, but I think you'll find a way to navigate that and maybe inspire somebody else in the process.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you for coming out. Where can people connect and learn more about you?
Yeah. So you could subscribe to my newsletter on Hello Adversity. It's helloadversity.substack.com. I think you'll include that in the show notes so I can, if I have to spell it out, that this could go downhill in a hurry. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the main thing that I use. I don't really use social media too much. I do have a LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, but that's about it. So there's
awesome.
If you subscribe to my newsletter, it'll send an automated email, and then if you wanted to respond to that, I'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. Well, that is a wrap. Big thank you for tuning in. If you have thoughts, questions, or ideas for future episodes, please drop me a message on any of the social media platforms I'm on. Please drop a review if you got some extra time. We'll see you next time. I love you all. See ya.